Hello and welcome back to my 10 favorite people. Hope you're doing well. I'm incredibly excited for today's video because Bitcoin is at a very pivotal decision point here. So I've decided to sell another 5% of my crypto holdings that are in Ethereum and move them over to cash. And there's a bunch of reasons for this. For one, we have Ethereum sitting at major resistance, both the mid-level of its 6-month trading range and the 20-week moving average. And I do believe the Ethereum ETF launches are a bit overhyped. I think too many market participants expect them to go just like the Bitcoin ones did, but I don't think the demand will be anywhere near as close. And because I see Bitcoin at this pivotal resistance, I would rather lock in some Ethereum gains than sell some of my Bitcoin, because I do think my portfolio is a bit Ethereum heavy when you account for market caps. And if we do end up reclaiming this 20-week moving average, range highs become very likely, and so does price discovery. And I would rather have some dry powder for altcoins if that were to occur. And if we do end up getting a rejection here and going to lower prices, I'll be happy I locked in that little bit of profit by selling an additional 5% of my Ethereum holdings. And hopefully now you guys can see why I only sold 5% last week when Bitcoin had that breakdown, because I always want to slowly DCA out in case we see a bounce. So because I sold that 5% last week and we saw that nice bounce and we're at the next resistance level, I'm happy selling that next 5%. I try not to go past a 30% cash allocation. So whatever happens from this point on, I'm only interested in buying. So we'll see what happens in that regard. Now, the market does have a lot of short-term headwinds, so it's going to be very interesting to see where Bitcoin closes this weekly candle. We have the US president getting sick. We have no idea if this is real or not, or if it's going to be used as an excuse for him to drop out of the race. But what we do know for sure is that markets absolutely hate uncertainty. So don't be surprised if we see some continued weakness in the S&P 500. And as a result, we see some weakness in Bitcoin over the next few weeks as we see what happens with this situation and whether or not he's going to recover or they're going to find a replacement to run against Trump in this election. And that makes this one of the more important narratives to monitor, because we're going to find out if we're going to have a new presidential candidate from the Democrat side or if it's going to stay Biden. So definitely something that markets are going to be paying attention to. As for the Mt. Gox creditors, I saw that some people had been paid back, but there's also a lot of people getting failed login attempts. So it's unclear how that's going to impact supply dynamics quite yet. But as if the German government selling Bitcoin followed by all these Mt. Gox repayments wasn't enough, BlockFi had to join the party as well and start paying back their distributions through Coinbase this month. I have no idea how much actual crypto is getting paid back. And of course, we're still seeing sell pressure coming from Bitcoin miners because we haven't seen that hash rate recovery quite yet. And we're still seeing miner capitulation here on the hash ribbons indicator. But it's great that all of these sell pressure dynamics are getting sorted out now during the summer, when Bitcoin's price action tends to be pretty choppy anyway. And although we've seen an incredible squeeze over the past 2 weeks, this is also something we see every summer, narratives aside. We saw a July squeeze in 2019. We saw a July squeeze followed by a pullback in 2020. We saw a July squeeze in 2022. We saw a July squeeze in 2023 before a sell-off in August. I think that was right around when XRP won their case against the SEC, and we saw markets rally, but it just ended up being a July wick around mid-July. So I'm not saying markets have to go down, but I just have my expectations relatively low for the summer because I've seen how Bitcoin price action likes to chop around and wreck investors by sentiment flipping back and forth each and every year. And so far this year looks no different, because within a 72-hour period, we went from it's all over to we're so back, this is the super cycle. And this is just what you expect to see in these low liquidity Bitcoin summers. But of course, as always, even though there's some short-term headwinds, things still look okay. We did see that nice range reclaim by Bitcoin. So as long as we're above 61.5K, there aren't any red flags quite yet. Of course, that resistance level at the 20-week moving average we just spoke about is the pivotal level to watch. And perhaps we consolidate between there and 61.5K before Bitcoin decides its next direction. But in terms of bullish long-term catalysts, we're still still seeing some nice ETF inflows. We haven't seen outflows in over 2 weeks now. So it's nice to see more and more Bitcoin being taken off the market. And of course, the CEO of the largest asset manager in the world, Larry Fink, is still out there pumping Bitcoin and talking about it. We'll see what kind of narrative they cook up for Ethereum and what kind of demand they can bring to those new Ethereum ETFs, because as of right now, he's still talking a lot about Bitcoin, and we're seeing a lot of inflows into the Bitcoin ETFs, but we'll see how that shapes up for Ethereum. And it's hard not to be bullish in the long term when the leading presidential candidate is coming out and saying all of these pro-crypto things. But of course, we're still trying to figure out what type of path this cycle is going to follow. We're at that pivotal decision point here where if we can get that breakout, maybe the left translated peak between now and November is back in play. But if we get rejected here, then that normal cycle thesis that's been our base case for a while likely continues to play out. And that's why this pivotal level here is so important, because it's going to have quite a large impact on what we can expect for the rest of the summer and for Q4. As for macro, it's still consensus that we're going to get a rate cut in September, November, and then December once again. Obviously, data prints are going to have the largest impact on this, and we don't know if the markets are going to be able to hold up until September when we're expected to get those rate cuts, because we are seeing inflation coming down nicely on the core PCE, the Fed's preferred inflation metric. But of course, we're seeing some expedited weakness in the labor market, which of course is not good for the economy. So these are the two main data points to watch. And as of right now, it seems like rate cuts in September are all but certain. We still have about 2 months between now and then, and a lot can happen in 2 months. As for the dollar index, still below support here and still showing signs that it might be getting ready to break down, but of course it's still too early to know for sure, and we know it has an inverse correlation with Bitcoin. So if we do want to see Bitcoin rally higher in the short term, we want to see that breakdown from the dollar index happen sooner rather than later, especially if we also want to see that alt season that tends to happen when Bitcoin enters those mania phases as a result of a weak dollar index. Now, what has been interesting over the past few days is the weakness we've seen in the S&P 500. Of course, we don't have our close until tomorrow, but this is quite an interesting bearish engulfing candle as of right now. And of course, if nothing were to change between now and tomorrow's weekly close, this would be a pretty good sign for a local top, which would agree with the thesis that Bitcoin might have to go lower and consolidate here. But of course, we'll see what happens between now and tomorrow's close. And of course, we're still waiting to see if it's going to be Bitcoin that catches up to the S&P 500 or the S&P 500 that rolls over here. The S&P 500 rolling over here and having a bit of a correction is the scenario that makes more sense to me. But of course, we're going to have to wait for that weekly close as confirmation. As for Ethereum, as I said earlier, still think it could go higher here, but it's definitely at a very pivotal resistance. If it can get above this level and the Ethereum ETF launches end up being a success, we probably break higher here and enter price discovery. But if they end up being underwhelming and we put in a lower high here before retesting those range lows, then perhaps a longer consolidation period is still upon us. But of course, the Ethereum ETF launch on Tuesday of next week is the major catalyst and event to watch for Ethereum. So we won't know for sure until we see what those inflows or outflows are like. And of course, as for Solana, putting in a lower high as of right now, I was seeing a ton of euphoria on Twitter and YouTube that it was breaking out from this downtrend that it's been under for a while. But so far, we've just seen a wick above that 20-week moving average. Again, a lot of time between now and the close to make changes to this, but factually, it is a bearish retest of the mid-range and 20-week moving average until we get a weekly close above those levels. So for now, we'll wait and see what happens. I still think Bitcoin is in a fair value range, not at a huge discount, but also not extremely overvalued either. But of course, that could change between now and the end of the summer. So we'll see what Bitcoin decides to do. And of course, I'm still open to us retesting the low 50,000s or even the mid 40,000s if we end up seeing a larger correction in traditional markets and we see a bit of macro uncertainty regarding what the Fed is going to do and surrounding the election if we do see Biden step down. So definitely open to different levels being revisited, and I'm not convinced that that was the low quite yet, even though I'm seeing so much euphoria and excitement on the timeline. But of course, a lot of this is shorter term speculation. We're still very bullish Bitcoin in the long term, just like we're bullish the S&P 500 in the long term, because we don't expect money supply expansion or debt expansion to stop anytime soon. And as long as fiat currencies are being devalued, that should put upward pressure on risk assets like the S&P 500 and Bitcoin. So let me know what you expect. Will we be able to reclaim and break above this pivotal level, or will it be a retest rejection? Would love to know what you guys expect. Thank you so much for the support on the recent videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you soon.